Another break in the Colonial Parkway murders. I'm News 3 reporter Brendan Ponton taking a look about what we know as investigators say they have now solved the murders of Cathy Thomas and Becky Dowski from 1986. Thomas and Dowski were brutally murdered along the Colonial Parkway, and for decades the case went cold. But now, investigators say a familiar name, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., was responsible for killing them all those years ago.
It's one of the most infamous cold cases in the history of Hampton Roads, the Colonial Parkway Murders. There have been books written about it, podcasts published about it, social media pages dedicated to investigating the cases and sharing updates. And in January 2026, after decades of uncertainty, the FBI made a major announcement in solving a double homicide, the first of the known murders in the case. Welcome to True Crime 757, where we dig deeper into the stories we put on TV. I'm John Sham, and I'm joined today by our reporter Brendan Ponton, who's actually been covering the Colonial Parkway Murders case for WTKR for about a decade. So before we get into what we learned this week, Brendan, can you just kind of give us some background about what the Colonial Parkway Murders were?
Sure. The Colonial Parkway Murders, as you mentioned, probably the most famous murders in Hampton Roads history, perhaps. They are a series of double homicides that happened in the late 1980s. All four of them involved couples, and they remained unsolved for decades. And the reason they've gotten so much attention over the years is because there was a lot of speculation about whether or not they were the work of a serial killer. And so there's been a lot of different theories over the years about whether or not they were all connected, whether some of them are connected, or whether they were just all individual cases. But because some of the circumstances were similar, that they involved couples and young adults or teenagers even, and they all happened in the peninsula at Williamsburg area in the same time frame. So they were all grouped together for a long time. And now in recent years and this week even, we're learning a lot more perhaps about what happened and how some of them are linked.
Why would Colonial Parkway have been a place where a lot of these couples were when this, potential serial killer may have found them there?
Sure. Well, we know two of them were directly involved with the Colonial Parkway. Two of the cases, the victims' cars were found on the Colonial Parkway. And so this is a stretch of roadway that connects Williamsburg and Yorktown. It's very, very scenic if you've never driven on it, especially in the summer. It's right along the water, the York River right there. So in the 80s and in that kind of era, it was perceived to be kind of a lover's lane and maybe a place where if you're on a date with somebody and you didn't want to go home quite yet, maybe you would go take a drive along the Colonial Parkway, maybe pull over. There's a bunch of different rest areas that you can pull over and have a view of the water. It's a nice scenic area. So that was kind of how it was viewed.
And just a quick note about the Colonial Parkway. It's called that because it connects these three very historic towns, Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Jamestown. Obviously, everybody knows, the history with Colonial Williamsburg. But also Jamestown was the first English settlement, and people know that Yorktown was the place where, the decisive final battle in the Revolutionary War occurred. But in the last 40 years, that term Colonial Parkway has been connected to a much more nefarious history, and that is these Colonial Parkway murders. So like I said before, we had a big update this week from the FBI. What did they tell us this week?
I was in my car the other day and we got an email from the FBI saying that they were connecting Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. to the deaths of Cathy Thomas and Becky Dowski. Now, they're the first case considered part of the Colonial Parkway murders. They were killed in October 1986. Their car was found at the edge of the York River. It appeared someone tried to set the car on fire but didn't. And we know that their throats were cut from beyond ear to ear. So it was a really horrific crime scene for these two. But now Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., who we'll get to a little bit later, a little bit more about him, but he's been connected to another one of the Colonial Parkway murders. His name's been out there for several years now. And so it was kind of a surprise this week to get this update saying that they were now connecting him to another Colonial Parkway murder case. And the way this was kind of sent out, there wasn't a big to-do about it. It was just a press release from the FBI announcing major news on a story we've been covering for decades here at WTKR. And it was a very big update.
And, they've done updates in the past with breaks in this case where there have been press conferences and stuff with other local police agencies like Hampton Police, Isle of Wight County. Why do you think they didn't do a press conference this time?
It's a good question. I think that they maybe want to see and not get too ahead of themselves on trying to figure out if Wilmer's connected to some of the other cases that are part of the Colonial Parkway murders. It's still an ongoing investigation. They are, I know that in recent years, they've been taking investigative steps to try and solve the other cases. They've been diving in the water there by the Colonial Parkway, I know. So it might have just been, they don't want to get too far ahead of themselves or tip their hat on to what they're doing in their investigative techniques.
It's pretty remarkable that they still continue to pursue answers on this case that is, these cases that are 40, 30, 35 plus 40 years old. Getting back to Cathy Thomas and Becky Dowski, what do we know about them and the circumstances of the night that they were killed?
Sure. Well, we know Cathy was a graduate of the Naval Academy and had been stationed down here in Hampton Roads. And Becky Dowski was a student at William and Mary, and they were dating. And we know that they were last seen leaving, or they were seen leaving William and Mary that night. And then they were later found dead along the Colonial Parkway.
And I remember, when I was doing research for this podcast, reading, the comment you made about how they were, they were cut from ear to ear. Remember reading that they were almost decapitated with how badly they were. It's a really horrible tragedy. You've talked with Cathy's brother many times about this case, and you spoke to him, in fact, this week after the FBI release came out. How did he feel? Like, what did he say when he learned this news?
Well, like I mentioned, Wilmer's name has been out there since 2024, and since he's been connected to another one of the Colonial Parkway murder cases. And so Bill Thomas, Cathy's brother, he does a true crime podcast himself, and he's been talking about Wilmer for the last 2 years, and people message him information about Wilmer. He talks to law enforcement as much as he can about his sister's case. And so he was surprised to learn that Wilmer was considered to be the suspect in this case, just because he has thoroughly looked into Wilmer himself and has a lot of information about him. So he said he was surprised to learn about it.
Now, Brendan, it's just, my head is kind of spinning. It's kind of hard to absorb it all. I was still surprised it was Wilmer. I always knew that was a possibility, but other suspects had sounded more likely somehow.
That's really interesting to know that he's done a lot of research on this person who they now believe, was responsible for his sister's death. So we talked a little bit about Wilmer. What else do we know about Alan Wilmer?
Sure. So we know that he was a waterman from Lancaster County, Virginia. He was known actually to drive around the Colonial Parkway. And what's notable is he had a blue pickup truck with the license plate EM Raw, which is supposed to mean Eat 'em Raw. So that's a pretty notable license plate. And so I know when the investigators in one of their previous press conferences, they really made note of his car and his license plate because people might remember that from the time. But what is very important to note in this case is that Wilmer passed away in 2017. So they are now connecting him to more and more cases, but because he passed away in 2017, he won't face charges or anything like that.
And so, but his death was very important to this investigation because he had never been convicted of a felony. So they didn't have his DNA evidence on record. And it wasn't until his death that they were able to obtain the DNA evidence that allowed them to start connecting him to some of these gruesome murders.
Right. And that is key. And of course, DNA technology has changed a lot over the years, and there's been a lot of improvements. And so with all those improvements, they were eventually down the line able to connect him to the cases, the Cathy Thomas and Becky Dowski case. Now, what's very notable about the first case, the Thomas Dowski case, is that there was a lot of physical evidence from the crime scene. There were their bodies, there were the car, there was the fact that somebody tried to light it on fire. So there was a lot of physical evidence that over the years investigators have had. And with all that evidence, unfortunately, it took 40 years to get to this point where they were finally able to say Wilmer was the one who did it.
Wow. And we know that there are several other cases that he's connected to. We're going to touch more about Wilmer and some of those cases when we come back from this break.
Your world changed in seconds, not by choice. But now, you get to choose who fights for you. At Courtland Law, we don't just handle cases like the other firms. We go to war to get our clients paid for their injuries. Personal injury, real people, real stakes. Let us carry the weight. Free consultation, fierce representation. Courtland Law, because this fight is personal.
After days of not seeing their loved ones,
Colonel Knobling's son David has been missing since the weekend.
Bonnie Dodson and her daughter Jeanette tuned in to the 6 o'clock news, expecting to hear a report about how the family's middle child, Robin, had disappeared. Not far away, Michael Knobling sat with his mom as the news started, but they all watched in horror as they heard the headline.
And the headline was, couple found murdered.
He said she had been shot in the back of the head.
Execution style.
Me and my mom were just sitting at the house watching the news, and boom. So I remember that day clear as a bell. It was the worst day of my life.
We're back with reporter Brendan Ponton talking about the Colonial Parkway Murders case. Obviously, there was a big break in the case this week, according to the FBI, linking DNA evidence from Alan Wilmer to the first known murders in the case. But there are several other murders that Wilmer is either directly connected to through DNA evidence or police or investigators believe that he may be connected to. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of those other cases. So the next case happened in September 1987. Can you tell us about what happened in that instance?
Sure. Well, it was male and female, David Knobling and Robin Edwards. A group of people had gone out that night. Robin Edwards was a part of that. David Knobling had a pickup truck. He had driven them around. They went home. They dropped Robin off. And it appears at some point that night, Robin snuck out of her house, met up with David, and then their car was found. The pickup truck was found on the other side of the James River Bridge. If you were going from Newport News over to Isle of Wight County, it's right there on the left side as you're on the bridge. So the pickup truck was found there, but their bodies weren't immediately found. And so this led to a search, and a jogger wound up discovering Robin's body, and then David's father actually discovered his body. And we know both of them had been shot in the back of the head. And so another tragic case involving two people. It appears perhaps a vehicle was involved. We know David's wipers were on, the radio was on, so there was a lot of suspicious circumstances when they found his car. And then, of course, unfortunately, they found their bodies. So this case also went cold for a long time. It happened in 1987. I spoke to the family members in this case. I did a story with them in 2017 on the 30th anniversary, and the families really had no hope that this was ever going to be solved. They kind of felt like so much time had passed. They had no answers.
I don't think that we'll truly ever know. They were in the wrong spot at the wrong time.
That's the worst part about it all, man, is not having nobody to blame, nobody to take your anger out on.
And fast forward to January 2024, and we learned then, and this was the first time we learned about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. The investigators said that he was responsible for killing them back in 1987.
We are here to announce that a suspect has been identified in two separate homicides that happened more than 35 years ago in the Hampton Roads region. Through forensic evidence analyzed and certified by the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. has been declared the person responsible for the September 1987 double homicide in Isle of Wight County.
So the next case was the murder of an 18-year-old woman named Laurie Powell, who was also linked to Wilmer, and that just happened a few months ago in November 2025. Virginia State Police did a press conference at that time where members of Laurie's family were present.
The Isle of Wight Commonwealth's attorney confirms that if Alan Wilmer Sr. was alive today, he would be charged for Powell's homicide.
And they talked about how Wilmer was connected to this case. Now, this case, while it's connected to Wilmer, is not believed to be one of the, quote, Colonial Parkway murders, because the Colonial Parkway murders have very similar circumstances. But Can you tell us a little bit about what happened to Laurie Powell?
Well, we know Laurie disappeared in March 1988 and then was found about a month later, and she was stabbed to death. So this case also went cold for a long time. Her family had been outspoken over the years and trying to find some kind of answer, some kind of justice. And then in November 2025, investigators came forward and said they believed Wilmer was also her killer. And they said that they used advanced forensic evidence to connect her to Wilmer in this case.
To include the sharing of Wilmer Sr.'s genetic profile was crucial in helping us achieve these long-awaited results.
Police say Powell was sexually assaulted by Wilmer, and they were able to link his DNA to their evidence.
Yeah, we were there at the press conference in November, and you know, we had a reporter at that event, and members of Powell's family spoke. We're going to play a little bit of sound from that event.
Nothing can erase the pain of losing Laurie Ann. Today we find comfort in knowing that the truth has come to light and that accountability has finally been achieved. We hope this resolution brings a measure of peace to everyone who loved her and all the families still waiting for justice.
During that press conference, it was stated that if Alan Wilmer was alive, they would have sufficient evidence to charge him with Powell's murder. So, and yet there was another case that happened about a year after that, Theresa Howell, and her rape and murder were posthumously. Can you tell us a little bit about Theresa Howell and what happened in her case?
Well, we know Theresa was a 29-year-old woman, and she was last seen at an establishment called the Zodiac Club. It was July 1989, and then she was later found strangled to death, and police said she was sexually assaulted. So police in January 2024 held that press conference where they connected Wilmer to David Knobling and Robin Edwards, and at that same press conference they announced that Theresa Howell was also killed by Wilmer. So it was the first time we were learning about Wilmer. It was the first time in a long time investigators had spoken publicly about the Colonial Parkway murders, and so that was when we learned that Theresa Howell was an additional victim, unfortunately, in this case.
So a lot of different police authorities have been involved in these cases over the decades, right? And obviously the release this week from the FBI. Virginia State Police held a press conference last year. We know that Isle of Wight County Police have been involved in these cases, Hampton Police. Can you just help me understand a little bit, like, so why all of these different police entities?
Well, it all matters where the bodies were discovered. So the Colonial Parkway is federal property, and so that's why the FBI is involved in the two cases that are specifically where the vehicles were found on the Colonial Parkway. And then so the Knobling-Edwards case was in Isle of Wight County where their bodies were discovered, so that's why it was over there. And then there's a fourth case that we're going to get to that was in New Kent County, and so that involved just a different law enforcement agency as well. So, and then Virginia State Police, I think when you have a cluster of cases like that, they get involved in their investigative folks as well.
So you referenced those other cases. We are going to talk more about that and a little bit more about what remains to be solved in the Colonial Parkway murders when we come back from this break.
Your world changed in seconds, not by choice. But now, you get to choose who fights for you. At Corseland Law, we don't just handle cases like the other firms. We go to war to get our clients paid for their injuries. Personal injury, real people, real stakes. Let us carry the weight. Free consultation, fierce representation. Corseland Law, because this fight is personal.
It was 30 years ago today, April 9th, 1988. Keith Call and Cassandra Haley go on a date together in Newport News. First to the movies and then to a party near Christopher Newport University. The next day, Keith's car is found along the Colonial Parkway, but Keith and Cassandra are nowhere to be found.
We're back on True Crime 757. We're talking with reporter Brendan Ponton about the Colonial Parkway murders. The next case we're going to talk about is the case of two Christopher Newport University students who in 1988 disappeared and were never seen again. Brendan, what happened with Keith Call and Cassandra Haley?
Well, as you mentioned, they were CNU students and they went on a date together in April 1988. We know that they went to the movies that night and then they stopped by a party around the CNU campus, and that was the last time that they were ever seen. So the next day, Keith's car was found along the Colonial Parkway but he was not in the car. And unfortunately, in this case, Keith and Cassandra have never been found. They are presumed to be dead, but the bodies in this case were never found. And that's been tough. I've spoken to the families over the years, and it's tough, saying goodbye to your loved one and then just never knowing what happened to them. They vanished basically without a trace. And there was a theory maybe at some point that they tried to go swimming in the river and got swept away, but the family never really believed that. And so what's happened in this case is that Alan Wade Wilmer is believed to be connected to it. And that's according to Keith's family. They've said on podcasts and in other mentions that they have been told by investigators that Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. is believed to be connected to this case. But so far, investigators have not publicly come forward and shared that with the public. It's important to note that Wilmer is believed to have been involved in the Keith Call and Cassandra Haley case, but there has never been a direct link through DNA or forensic evidence. And a lot of that is perhaps due to the fact that their bodies were never found.
Well, speaking of forensic evidence and DNA, that is what FBI investigators said in January 2026 is what allowed them to link Alan Wilmer to the first known murders in this case. So what did the FBI say they were able to accomplish this week that they weren't able to do before?
So in this case, and I did talk to Bill Thomas, as we mentioned, Cathy Thomas's brother. And so, as I mentioned, there was a lot of physical evidence in the first case. And so after all these years, investigators say that there were breakthroughs in DNA analysis and forensic science. And they were saying that that's well beyond what they were able to do 40 years ago when Cathy and Becky were murdered. And in talking to Bill, he told me that investigators told him that a DNA of Wilmer was found on Becky Dowski's clothing.
They have a DNA match to an article of Becky's clothing, and obviously Wilmer's DNA does not belong on Becky's clothing.
There's obviously other evidence that they probably have that they haven't publicly shared, but they were emphasizing that just the DNA breakthroughs that they've been able to do over the years led to them saying that Wilmer was responsible for this latest case. And they did say, in their view, if Wilmer were alive, that they would have sufficient evidence to charge him in this double murder. So it was a federal case because it happened on federal property, so he would have faced federal charges.
While that case appears to be closed for the families of Thomas and Dowski, there's another case in the Colonial Parkway murders where there really hasn't been another suspect named. It was the murders of Anna Marie Phelps and Daniel Lauer. They disappeared in New Kent County in September 1989, and their decomposed bodies were found weeks later. What do we know about this other case that's considered connected to the Colonial Parkway murders?
Right. Yeah, this one's a little bit different in terms of the geography, as it was right off 64 in New Kent County. So it's close to the other cases, but it is a little farther west from where the other cases originated. And so we know that WTKR reported about 15 years ago that there was an undated note that was discovered in a box in Phelps's apartment. It was believed to have been written by her, and it said that she intended to meet somebody in a blue van at a rest stop. But we know that as of January 2026, police have not directly linked her so far to Alan Wilmer Sr. So that case remains open, unsolved as far as we know, and investigators haven't shared any updates with us on that case. And so I think going forward, the Colonial Parkway families want to see all of the cases solved. And so Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, while we mentioned that there is believed to be a link with Wilmer, it's never been confirmed publicly by authorities. And so I think the family in that case wants to have a public display of being told who is responsible in that case. And then in this case from September 1989, they also want to see a resolution in that case. So there's been some big time developments in the Colonial Parkway murders in recent years on, like I mentioned, cases families thought were maybe never going to be solved. We've seen 2 of the Colonial Parkway murders now be solved. One of them appears to have a link that we know of. And then the other one, we're still waiting for some more information. So big updates, but still work to be done on solving the Colonial Parkway murders and putting them all to rest.
Well, and we hope that investigators will make more progress, and we're glad to hear that they are still pursuing this case on behalf of the families. So if or when there are future updates, or if we do hear back from the FBI about joining us on this, we will do another episode about the Colonial Parkway murders. But for now, Brendan, thank you for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you adding some context to this story and all of your reporting that you've done on this case over the last several years, with WTKR. So this has been another episode of True Crime 757, and we'll see you next time.